My name is Captain Sarah Jenkins, and I had just returned from a grueling 14-month combat deployment overseas. I expected to return to Jenkins Manor, the $15 million estate my late grandfather, Charles Jenkins, left me as a testament to our shared military legacy. Instead, I stood outside the locked iron gates of my childhood home, shivering under a heavy trench coat, watching a massive wedding tent rise on my front lawn. The cold autumn wind whipped through the trees, carrying the cheerful laughter of caterers and decorators who were busy preparing for a lavish celebration. Through the wrought iron bars, I could see a large custom welcome sign that read, "Clara and Marcus, together forever." My heart sank into a dark, bottomless abyss. Just hours prior, the county clerk had informed me that according to their official records, Captain Sarah Jenkins was legally deceased. The shock of that moment in the county records office still vibrated through my bones, making my hands tremble beneath my pockets. I had walked into that sterile building expecting a simple administrative update, only to be met with a pale, horrified look from a clerk who insisted my social security number belonged to a soldier who had perished in a foreign land. She had shown me a copy of a death certificate, signed and stamped, listing my date of death as 6 months ago. The document claimed my remains had been processed and that my sister, Clara Jenkins, had been recognized as my sole surviving heir. Standing there in the lobby, surrounded by the hum of fluorescent lights and the clicking of computer keyboards, I felt a dizzying sensation of non-existence, as if the ground beneath my combat boots had suddenly liquefied. Now, staring at the grand stone pillars of Jenkins Manor, the reality of the betrayal began to take shape with agonizing clarity. The trench coat I wore hid my pristine, decorated Army service uniform, the brass buttons and colorful ribbons representing years of sacrifice, discipline, and blood. I was a ghost, standing on the periphery of my own life, watching the sister I had protected and the man I had loved prepare to exchange vows on the land that belonged to me. The white silk of the wedding tent billowed like a mocking sail in the distance, and the realization that my entire identity had been systematically erased by my own blood sent a cold shiver down my spine. Jenkins Manor was not just a valuable piece of real estate, it was the physical embodiment of my grandfather, Colonel Charles Jenkins. He was the only real parent I had ever known after our mother passed away when we were children. My grandfather was a man of quiet honor, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that always carried the scent of sweet pipe tobacco and pine wood. He had spent decades maintaining the estate, teaching me how to care for the land, how to ride the horses we used to keep in the western paddock, and most importantly, how to lead with integrity. He saw a kindred spirit in me, a young girl who looked at his old military journals with awe and swore that one day she would wear the uniform too. Clara, however, had always lived in a different world. She was our mother's favorite, the delicate golden child who was shielded from every hardship. My mother had always coddled her, whispering that Clara was too fragile for the harsh realities of life, while I was built to endure. Whenever Clara made a mistake, it was brushed aside, but when I stumbled, I was expected to stand up immediately and double my efforts. Our mother always used to tell me that Clara needed the family's softest cushions because she was not strong like me. "We never expected much from you, Sarah, because we knew you could survive anything, but Clara needs our protection." Those words had carved a deep trench between my sister and me, one that only widened after our grandfather passed away and left the entire estate to me in his will, recognizing my dedication to preserving his legacy. Marcus had entered my life when I was at my most vulnerable, shortly after my grandfather's funeral. He was handsome, attentive, and seemingly devoted to the military traditions of our family. He held my hand as I wept over my grandfather's grave, promising that he would stand by me through any storm. When my deployment orders arrived, I felt a sense of peace knowing Marcus would be there to help Clara manage the estate's basic administrative needs. I signed a limited power of attorney, trusting him with the keys to the kingdom, believing his love was as solid as the foundation of Jenkins Manor. It was a calculated, devastating mistake. They had taken my trust, my love, and my absence, and they had forged a weapon to completely obliterate my existence. The wind grew colder, and I knew I could not stand in the shadows forever. I walked along the perimeter of the tall stone wall, seeking the small side gate that led to the servants' entrance, a path I had walked 1,000 times as a child. I pressed my palm against the iron latch, hoping against hope that some part of my home would still recognize me. The gate groaned open, and I slipped inside, keeping my trench coat tightly wrapped around my uniform. I kept my head down, avoiding the busy caterers carrying silver trays of champagne glasses toward the main tent. My objective was simple. I needed to look Clara in the eye and hear the truth from her own lips. As I neared the stone veranda, I was suddenly blocked by two burly men wearing dark suits and earpieces. They did not look like local caterers, they looked like professional, hired security. One of them stepped forward, his hand resting near his belt, his expression completely devoid of warmth. "This is a private event, ma'am. I am going to have to ask you to leave the property immediately." I pulled myself up to my full height, the posture of a military officer asserting itself naturally. "I am Sarah Jenkins, and this is my home. Step aside." The guard did not blink, but a faint flicker of recognition crossed his eyes before his expression hardened again. "We have strict orders from the property owners, Mr. and Mrs. Marcus Vance. No trespassers are allowed on the premises, especially anyone claiming to be the deceased sister. Please leave before we have to forcibly remove you." The words felt like a physical blow to my chest. They had preempted my arrival. They had warned their security about me, framing me as an unstable imposter. Before I could speak, the glass double doors of the veranda opened, and Clara stepped out, holding a clipboard. She was wearing a beautiful cashmere sweater, her hair perfectly styled, looking every bit the elegant lady of the manor. When her eyes fell upon me, she froze, her face draining of color for a fraction of a second before her features rearranged themselves into a cold, superior sneer. "It is all right, Thomas. I will handle this." The guards stepped back, though they remained alert, watching my every move. Clara walked down the stone steps, her high-fashion boots clicking against the flagstones, a sound that used to bring me comfort but now filled me with a sickening dread. She stopped a few feet away, looking at me as if I were a stray dog that had wandered onto her pristine lawn. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah. You died in that desert. That is the official story, and that is the story everyone has accepted." I stared at my sister, my voice trembling with a mixture of rage and profound sorrow. "Clara, how could you do this? I am your sister. I fought for this country. I fought to keep us safe, and you forged my death certificate? You stole my home?" Clara took a slow, deliberate breath, her eyes narrowing. "This home belongs to someone who actually lives here, Sarah. Grandfather was wrong to leave it to you. You were always away, playing soldier, while I was left here to rot in your shadow. Marcus and I deserve this life. You don't need a $15 million estate in a muddy ditch overseas." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Go away, Sarah. If you try to ruin my wedding, I will have the police arrest you for harassment and identity theft. Nobody will believe a disgraced owl soldier over me." She turned on her heel and walked back into the house, leaving me standing in the cold. Desperate to find some shred of my past, I bypassed the guards by slipping through the dense rhododendron bushes toward the old carriage house. I climbed the wooden stairs to the back entrance of the main house, a route we used to use when we played hide-and-seek as children. I managed to slip inside the service corridor, the familiar smell of old wood and beeswax hitting my senses. I hurried toward my childhood bedroom, needing to see my sanctuary, needing to touch the walls that had sheltered me for 18 years. When I opened the door, my breath caught in my throat. The room was unrecognizable. My vintage wooden desk, my bookshelf filled with military history volumes, and my grandfather's old maps had all been ripped away. The walls, which had been painted a soft forest green, were now a sterile, glossy white. The room had been completely converted into a massive walk-in wardrobe for Claire's wedding shoes and designer dresses. Hundreds of expensive heels lined the shelves where my books once stood. I walked down the hallway, my heart pounding, and looked out the window toward the back courtyard. There, sitting near the gravel driveway, was a massive industrial dumpster. I ran down the back stairs, ignoring the risk of being spotted, and climbed onto the metal rim of the dumpster. Inside, buried beneath broken drywall and discarded cardboard, were my personal belongings. My high school track medals, my childhood photo albums, and a bundle of handwritten letters from my grandfather were all rotting in the damp trash. I pulled a framed photograph from the pile, the glass shattered, showing a picture of my grandfather and me standing proudly next to my first horse, a beautiful bay mare named Willow. I clutched the ruined frame to my chest, the sharp glass cutting into my hand, but I felt no physical pain. The emotional agony was too immense. I sank to my knees in the mud beside the dumpster, the tears finally spilling over my eyelids, hot and bitter. I sobbed silently, my shoulders shaking, feeling completely erased from the face of the earth. I forced myself to stand, wiping the tears and mud from my face. I had to go to the bank. Surely the financial institutions would have a record of my active accounts, my military savings, the money I had carefully hoarded over a decade of service to secure my future. I drove my rented sedan to the local branch of the Veterans Savings Bank, my hands tight on the steering wheel, my mind racing. When I sat across from the branch manager, a kind-faced woman who looked at my uniform with respect, my hope was quickly extinguished. She pulled up my account and her face fell. She turned the monitor toward me, showing a balance of 0. I am so sorry, Captain Jenkins. Our records show that 6 months ago, your power of attorney, Marcus Vance, presented a certified death certificate along with a legally executed estate transfer. The entire balance of your savings, over $400,000, was transferred to a joint account under his and Clara Jenkins's names. I stared at the empty screen, the numbers blurring. That money was my life savings. It was meant to repair the estate's barn. The manager sighed, her eyes filled with genuine pity. Since the documents were legally notarized and the death certificate was verified by the county, the bank executed the transfer. We had no reason to suspect any foul play. I left the bank feeling lighter, as if my very substance was being chipped away ounce by ounce. I drove to the local jewelry boutique where our family's safety deposit box was kept, hoping to retrieve my mother's irreplaceable heirloom wedding gown, a dress my grandfather had kept in pristine condition for the day I would marry. I was met with the same devastating news. Clara had accessed the box weeks ago, claiming the heirloom as her own. She had taken the dress, the delicate lace gown that my mother had worn, the only physical connection I had left to her memory. Later that evening, sitting in a dark corner of a local diner, I opened my phone and saw a notification. A local lifestyle blog had posted a video of Clara and Marcus. I tapped the screen, and my former fiancé's face appeared, looking solemn and deeply sorrowful. "We are so heartbroken that Sarah cannot be with us on our special day," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false emotion as he put his arm around Clara. Her tragic desertion from her unit and her subsequent passing in a foreign land have left a dark cloud over our family. But we know she would want us to move forward, to cherish this beautiful estate and keep her memory alive in our own way. Clara nodded, wiping a fake tear from her eye. "We are dedicating our wedding to her memory. It is what she would have wanted." The hypocrisy was suffocating. They were using my sacrifice, my military service, and my supposed dishonor to paint themselves as grieving, noble survivors while they spent my money and lived in my home. I collapsed against the vinyl booth of the diner, my head in my hands. The depth of their malice was a chasm I could not fathom. I felt a profound, paralyzing despair, wondering if it was even worth fighting anymore. They had the county records, they had the bank, they had the public sympathy, and they had my home. I was just a solitary soldier with no family left to vouch for me. In the deepest well of my despair, a voice echoed in my mind. It was my grandfather's voice, steady and strong, from a summer afternoon long ago when a severe storm had damaged our fences and flooded our pastures. "A Jenkins does not retreat from the high ground, Sarah," he had said, his hand heavy and warm on my shoulder. "When the storm is at its worst, that is when you dig your boots in. You trust your training, you trust the truth, and you never let them see you falter." I opened my eyes, the fog of self-pity clearing from my mind. I still had one card to play, a secret my grandfather had shared with me shortly before his passing. He had always been suspicious of Clara's manipulative nature and Marcus's sudden interest in our family's wealth. He had told me about a private safe deposit box at a small, independent trust bank in the state capital, one that did not carry the Jenkins name and was registered under his old military unit's designation. I drove through the night to the capital, my exhaustion forgotten, fueled by a cold, burning determination. The next morning, I stood in the vault of the private trust bank. The clerk handed me a heavy, brass safety box. With trembling fingers, I inserted the key my grandfather had given me, the one I had salvaged from the hollowed-out wooden soldier in his desk before it was thrown into the dumpster. The lock turned with a solid, satisfying click. Inside the box lay a pristine, certified copy of my grandfather's true last will and testament, stamped by a high court judge. Along with the will was a sealed envelope with my name written in his elegant, sweeping handwriting. I broke the seal and began to read, his voice coming alive on the paper. "My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, it means my fears have come to pass and your sister has allowed her jealousy to consume her. I know the lengths she and Marcus will go to claim what they did not earn. This will is the absolute, unalterable truth of my legacy. I have left everything to you because you possess the honor required to protect it. I have also left a detailed ledger of Clara's past financial misdeeds and a contact number for my dearest friend, General Arthur Vance. Trust him, Sarah. A spark of hope ignited in my chest, hot and fierce. I immediately called the number at the bottom of the letter. The call was answered on the second ring, a crisp, commanding voice filled with authority. This is General Vance. General, my name is Captain Sarah Jenkins. I am the granddaughter of Colonel Charles Jenkins. There was a long pause and then a heavy intake of breath. Sarah, we were told you were dead. We were told you deserted your post and perished. I have been trying to investigate this, but the local authorities blocked my inquiries. Where are you? I am alive, General, and I need your help to reclaim my life. We met at a secluded diner on the outskirts of the county. General Vance arrived in a plain vehicle, but his presence was undeniable. He was a four-star general, a man of immense influence and impeccable honor. As I laid out the certified will, the financial statements, and the forged death certificate, his face grew increasingly stern, his jaw clenching with military precision. This is a grave offense, Sarah. Forging military documents and declaring an active duty officer dead is a federal crime. They have bypassed the state system by using a corrupt local notary and a compromised county clerk. He looked at me, his eyes softening with deep respect. Your grandfather was a great man, and you are a highly decorated captain of the United States Army. We will not allow your name to be dragged through the mud. But we must be strategic. The local courts are heavily influenced by Marcus's family. We need to bypass them entirely. We spent the next 48 hours compiling our strategy. I contacted my grandfather's former estate accountant, a retired veteran who had been dismissed by Clara the moment I deployed. He wept when he heard my voice, confirming that he had been forced to sign non-disclosure agreements regarding the estate's true valuation and the suspicious transfers Marcus had initiated. We gathered statements from the neighbors, who had noticed strange moving trucks removing my grandfather's prized military memorabilia from the house in the dead of night. But just as we were preparing our legal offensive, the enemy struck back with a devastating blow. Marcus's high-priced legal team, tipped off by a clerk in the state probate office, filed an emergency motion. They presented a highly complex bureaucratic argument, claiming that my active-duty military documents were fabricated and that I was an imposter seeking to extort a grieving family. They used a corrupt local judge, a man who had long-standing ties to Marcus's family, to freeze our petition for an emergency injunction. The county clerk refused to halt the wedding or restore my title to Jenkins Manor, stating that a full civil trial would be required to determine my identity, a process that would take at least 6 months. I sat in my rented car outside the county courthouse, the weight of the rejection pressing down on me like a physical gravity. The wedding was scheduled to begin in less than 24 hours. The live stream of the event was already being promoted on local social media channels, showcasing the lavish decorations, the elite guests, and the celebration of my supposed demise. My phone vibrated in my hand. It was a text message from Clara. It was a photograph of her standing in front of the grand mirror at Jenkins Manor, wearing our mother's stolen heirloom gown, her smile triumphant and cruel. I hope you are watching, Sarah. The estate is ours, the money is spent, and tomorrow I will be the undisputed mistress of Jenkins Manor. You are a ghost, and nobody cares about a ghost. Don't show your face, or the guards will make sure you spend the night in a cell. The text was the final, devastating blow. I collapsed against the steering wheel, my body shaking with dry, painful sobs. I felt completely defeated. The system had failed me, my family had betrayed me, and the legacy of my grandfather was about to be permanently transferred to the people who had desecrated his memory. I questioned if the fight was even worth it anymore. Maybe I should just walk away, leave the country, and never look back. The car window tap-tapped, startling me. I looked up to see General Vance standing in the pouring rain, his face set in stone. I rolled down the window, my eyes red and swollen. General, we lost. The judge threw out the injunction. The clerk won't help us. They are going to get married tomorrow, and the estate will be legally theirs. The general did not look defeated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a gold-embossed leather folder, opening it to reveal a document bearing the seal of the United States Department of Justice and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. They forgot one crucial detail, Captain, the general said, his voice a low, thundering rumble. You are an active duty military officer. The forgery of your death certificate and the theft of your military pay are federal offenses under the jurisdiction of the federal government, not a corrupt county judge. I have spent the last 12 hours with the United States Attorney and the federal marshals. He smiled, a rare, fierce expression that filled me with a sudden, overwhelming surge of hope. We have bypass authority. The local police cannot touch you, and the local courts cannot protect them. We are going to reclaim your legacy, Sarah, and we are going to do it in front of the entire world. The morning of the wedding arrived, bright and clear, the sun shining down on Jenkins Manor as if the earth itself were celebrating the union of Clara and Marcus. The estate's driveway was lined with luxury cars, and the air was filled with the soft, elegant music of a live string quartet. Over 300 of the region's elite guests sat in gold-painted chairs beneath the massive white tent, their faces glowing with anticipation. High-definition cameras were positioned around the altar, broadcasting the event live to tens of thousands of viewers online, a highly publicized celebration of love and resilience in the face of family tragedy. At the altar stood Marcus, wearing a tailored tuxedo, a smug, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. The music shifted to the traditional bridal march, and the guests rose to their feet as Clara began her walk down the aisle. She looked radiant, the delicate vintage lace of our mother's wedding gown flowing behind her like a sea of white foam. She held a bouquet of white roses, her eyes locked onto Marcus with a look of shared triumph. They had won. We are gathered here today to unite Clara and Marcus in holy matrimony, and to remember the beautiful soul of Clara's sister, Captain Sarah Jenkins, whose tragic sacrifice, suddenly. The grand wooden doors of the estate's main entrance burst open with a resounding crash that echoed through the valley. The string quartet stopped playing, their bows frozen in midair. The guests gasped, turning their heads in unison toward the back of the lawn. I stepped through the threshold, the heavy trench coat gone. I stood tall, dressed in my full, immaculate Army service uniform. The deep blue fabric was pristine, the gold brass buttons gleaming in the autumn sun. Across my chest, the rows of medals and service ribbons, including my Bronze Star and Purple Heart, shone with a brilliant, blinding light. On my shoulders, the silver captain's bars caught the sun, a symbol of authority that no forged document could ever erase. Flanking me on either side were 4 armed federal marshals, their badges catching the light, their expressions grim and unyielding. Behind them stood 2 military police officers, their presence a stark, undeniable manifestation of federal power. I walked down the central aisle, my polished black dress shoes clicking against the stone path with a steady, rhythmic cadence. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, their faces frozen in absolute shock. I could hear the whispers rising like a wave of static electricity. "Is that Sarah? But she was reported dead! What is happening?" Clara's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. She clutched the bouquet of roses so tightly the stems snapped, the white petals fluttering to the ground. Marcus took a step back, his eyes wide with a terror so deep it seemed to paralyze him. I reached the front of the altar, stopping just a few feet from my sister and my former fiancé. I looked at Clara, my expression calm, dignified, and entirely steady, though a single tear of release gathered in the corner of my eye. The priest stood frozen, the Bible trembling in his hands. I reached out and gently took the wireless microphone from his hand, my voice carrying clearly through the high-end sound system, echoing over the lawn and directly into the livestream broadcast. "My name is Captain Sarah Jenkins," I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of command. "I have just returned from my deployment. I am not dead, and I am not a coward." The livestream cameras, operated by confused technicians who did not know whether to cut the feed, remained locked on me. Millions of viewers watched as the truth began to unfold. I turned to the lead federal marshal, who stepped forward, opening a leather portfolio. "Clara Jenkins and Marcus Vance," the marshal announced, his voice booming over the speakers. "You are under arrest by order of the United States District Court. The charges include federal document forgery, identity theft, grand larceny of military savings, and financial fraud." He turned to the corrupt county clerk who was sitting in the front row, his face covered in a cold sweat. "And you are under arrest as an accessory to federal fraud." The crowd erupted into chaotic murmurs. Clara let out a sharp, hysterical shriek, stepping back and tripping over the train of her stolen gown. "This is a mistake," she screamed, her voice cracking as she pointed a trembling finger at me. "She is an imposter. She is trying to ruin my life." "Marcus, do something." Marcus tried to step toward the side of the altar, but he was immediately blocked by two federal marshals, who grabbed his arms and forced them behind his back, the sharp, metallic click of handcuffs echoing through the silent tent. "Sarah, please," Marcus stammered, his face red with humiliation. "We can talk about this. We can settle this privately." I looked at him, my heart entirely free of the love I had once felt, replaced by a deep, quiet pity for his smallness. "There is nothing to talk about, Marcus. You took my trust, and you used it to steal my grandfather's legacy. You will answer to the federal government now." The marshals moved in on Clara. She struggled as they placed the handcuffs around her wrists, her screams of rage and desperation filling the air. The delicate lace of our mother's heirloom gown, which she had stolen, seemed to cling to her like a shroud of her own making. As she was led down the aisle in front of her wealthy friends, her perfect hair disheveled, her face twisted in ugly fury, the crowd watched in stunned, horrified silence. The live-stream cameras captured every single second of their arrest, broadcasting the public exposure of their greed to the entire nation. The story of the decorated captain who returned from the dead to reclaim her legacy spread like wildfire, a satisfying, powerful victory of truth over treachery. Within an hour, the estate was empty. The guests had fled in embarrassment, the caterers had packed up their trays, and the massive white tent stood silent, a hollow monument to a ruined wedding. The local police, guided by the federal marshals, cleared the property of all trespassers, leaving Jenkins Manor in a quiet, peaceful stillness it had not known for years. I stood on the stone veranda, watching the last of the police cruisers drive down the gravel road. The wind had died down, and the late afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over the green pastures. The silence was no longer heavy with betrayal. It was light, clean, and filled with a profound sense of peace. I walked back inside the main house, my steps echoing softly in the grand entrance hall. I climbed the stairs to my grandfather's old study, a room that had been locked and ignored by Clara and Marcus. I inserted the brass key into the lock and pushed the door open. The room was dusty, but untouched. The smell of sweet pipe tobacco and pine wood still lingered in the air, a faint, comforting presence that wrapped around me like a warm embrace. I walked over to his grand oak desk and opened the top drawer. There, lying beneath his old military journals, was his silver locket, the one he had always kept with him during his own service. I picked it up, pressing the cold metal to my lips, a soft, genuine smile spreading across my face. I walked downstairs to the grand parlor, where the fireplace stood cold and empty. I placed the silver locket back on the center of the wooden mantelpiece, its proper home, a symbol of our family's enduring honor. I looked out the tall glass windows, watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of deep purple and gold. The battle was over, my name was restored, my honor was untarnished, and my grandfather's legacy was safe in my hands. I was no longer a ghost in my own home. I was Captain Sarah Jenkins, and I had finally reclaimed my sanctuary.